Hello, my name is Johanna Smith, and I'm the author of Stargazer, the Horse Who Loved History. And you can see that Stargazer is a beautiful brown horse. And do you see he has a star on his forehead? And there's a little carriage behind him called a sulky. And a man sits in the sulky and then drives the horse that way. And the horses trot in races, pulling a sulky with a little man. One thing, Stargazer is a talking horse. So the race has begun, and Stargazer's, he's so tired, and he finishes last. He finishes last, and he's hot and he's sweaty. And so Clancy, the trainer, takes him back to the barn, and who shows up but Stargazer's owner, Barry, smoking a cigar. And Barry says, "Get rid of him. He's no good. I gambled a lot of money on him. Lost it all." Clancy says, not yet. Stargazer's still young, and he'll get better. I'll really work hard with him." And Barry says, "All right, Stargazer, this is your last chance. So you'll have one more race." And Stargazer says, "I'll try my hardest. I'll try my hardest." So after that, there was a big black horse in the stall next to him. And the big black horse's name was Bugle. And Bugle looked at Stargazer and said, "You're a loser. You've lost every race you've ever been in. You're going to get sold." And Stargazer was so sad. He lost every race. And he really tried his hardest. And across from him, in another barn across from him, was a gray horse named Shadow Dancer. And Shadow Dancer had just won the last race. And people were over in front of Shadow Dancer's stall, and people were taking pictures of him with cameras. And these pictures would probably be in the newspaper. And he was being given lumps of sugar. And Stargazer said, "Oh, I've never eaten a lump of sugar, but I've been told that it's better than oats or hay, but I'd have to win a race to get fed some sugar." The next month, every day, Stargazer was out on the track. He was trotting and trotting and trotting to get in really good shape for the next race. And he'd be so hot and so sweaty after he had to practice every time and try his hardest. But at the end of the month, Stargazer had the biggest muscles of any horse. The day of the race arrived. Barry showed up with a cigar and looked at Stargazer and said, "This is your last chance, Stargazer. You lose this, I get rid of you." Clancy says, "Don't worry about it, Barry. Don't worry about it." So all the horses lined up, because they're all pulled little sulkies. And the man who starts the race said, "Get ready, get set, go!" And Stargazer starts trotting as fast as he can go, and he's in the lead. He's in the lead. He's trotting as fast as he can go. And around the first curve, he's still in the lead. And then he's coming down to the back stretch, and he's still trotting really fast. But he notices a horse to the right trotting past him, and a horse to the left going past him. And before you knew it, all the horses had passed him, and he finished last. And he was so scared. And he went back to the barn, and he knew Clancy was angry with him. Clancy didn't pat him. And Barry came in with a cigar and said, "Clancy," that's a cigar, said, "by tomorrow, Stargazer, I want him gone." And Barry walked away, and Clancy walked away. That whole night, Stargazer couldn't sleep. It was like, oh, what's going to happen? Where am I going to live? Where am I going to live? Will I have any friends? He was so scared. And early the next morning, Clancy the trainer came and took Stargazer out of the stall and showed him to a man named Mr. Garcia. And Mr. Garcia looked at him and said, "How much you want for your horse?" And Clancy said, "Nothing. Get him out of here. Just get him out of here as fast as you can." Mr. Garcia said, "He's a good-looking horse." And he took Stargazer by the halter and he led Stargazer into a truck and then slammed the door. Well, inside the truck, there weren't any windows. And Stargazer was terrified. And then the truck started moving and the truck would hit potholes and he would be bounced to one side and bounced to the other. And his heart was just pounding, pounding, pounding. And he's thinking, where am I going to live? I promised to try harder. I'll try to be faster. Whatever they want me to do, I'll try. And so he starts hearing car horns, lots and lots and lots of car horns going honk, 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 and honk, 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 honk. And so he hears cars and the truck slows down. Truck stopped. Mr. Garcia comes and he takes Stargazer out of the truck and walks him over to this huge, huge contraption that has got 4 big wheels and hitches him up to it. And Stargazer thought, am I supposed to pull this huge carriage? I couldn't win when I just pulled a tiny little sulky with 2 wheels, and now do I race with this big carriage? And Mr. Garcia is waving to everybody who passes on the sidewalk saying, "Take the tour of historic Philadelphia, take the tour." And 4 people come over and they get up in the carriage, 4 people. Stargazer thinks, I don't know where the starting line is, where are the other horses, what am I supposed to be doing now? Mr. Garcia picked up the reins, which means go, to a trotting horse. And Stargazer took off down the street, trotting and trotting. He's passing cars, he's going as fast as he can. And Mr. Garcia says, "Whoa," and pulls back on the reins. Whoa. He said, "Stargazer, you walk. That's all you do is you walk." And Stargazer says, I can walk. So the entire day he walks and walks. And he looks around. He's never been in a big city before. You know, the racetrack, there wasn't a big city next to the racetrack. There was not a big city when he grew up with his mother. So he's looking at all of these buildings, and this place is called Philadelphia. So he says, all right, I'll walk, and then I know I'll have a place to live. And every night he gets fed, and he's in a barn, and he's starting to feel better. This is where he's going to live, and that he's going to get fed. So one day, Mr. Garcia stopped Stargazer right in front of Independence Hall. And Mr. Garcia waves, trying to get some customers, some tourists to come on in. And Stargazer is just looking around. And all of a sudden, Mr. Garcia looks, and there's a woman waving, "Mr. Garcia! Mr. Garcia, how nice to see you, and this is your new horse I see." And Mrs. Scattergood comes over to talk to Mr. Garcia. And she has a little girl who's 8 years old named Gretchen. And Gretchen sees Stargazer and says, "Oh, Mommy, 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 please let me pat this horse. Please, please, Mommy, I want to pat the horse." And Mrs. Scattergood says, "I don't know, Mr. Garcia. Does your horse bite?" Mr. Garcia says, "No, I never bites anybody." And Gretchen came over, and Stargazer put his head down, And Gretchen just patted him and patted him. He felt so good inside. And Gretchen said to Stargazer, I was just inside Independence Hall. Do you know what happened inside Independence Hall? Stargazer shook his head and said, no, what happened? Gretchen said, well, the Declaration of Independence was written there. And every American knows about the Declaration of Independence. It says all men and women are created equal. It doesn't matter if you're black or white or brown-skinned, all human beings are equal. And Stargazer's ears went back and forth because he's thinking very hard. He said, Gretchen, what about horses? Are we all born equal? Gretchen says, of course you are. It doesn't matter if a horse is black or white or brown or a pinto or a palomino. You're all born equal. Stargazer was so relieved because since he lost all his races, he didn't think he was as good as other horses. And he felt ashamed because he lost races and wasn't as good as the other horse. And now, here inside Independence Hall, he finds out that this Declaration of Independence means horses are born equal too. And Gretchen said, and I'll tell you what else I saw. And Mrs. Scattergood says, no, later on. We have to go home now. Gretchen, you need to do your homework. And Gretchen says, wait just 1 minute, Mommy. I think I have something special to give Stargazer. And she goes through her little pocketbook and she's searching inside and she comes out with a lump of sugar. And she holds it to Stargazer and he gently licks it off his hand. Sugar was like magic. It made your insides feel good. And he was so happy. He said, I got a lump of sugar. I've been told I was born equal to other horses. This is the happiest day I think of my whole life. And he says, Gretchen, can you come back and teach me to read? I understand history is very important. And because I now work in historic Philadelphia, I need to learn all about history. And Gretchen says, oh yes, that would be so much fun. Every day after you finish work, I'll come to your barn with books and I'll teach you to read. And Gretchen says, goodbye, Stargazer. And the Stargazer says, goodbye, Gretchen. And in his heart, he feels his life has really changed. So now when he goes to work, he's happy because Gretchen comes to the barn in the late afternoon, and he is a very, very smart horse. And Gretchen taught him the alphabet in one afternoon. And then she taught him to read children's books in one afternoon. And then she taught him to read high school books in one afternoon. Well, after that, he could read college books, he could read any book. And he knew that history was important, that he needed to know not just American history, but world history, because he understood that the United States of America became independent fighting against the British. And he said, I better learn about British history too. They have kings and queens, and we have a president. So he was so serious. He's a very, very serious horse when he studies because he wants to be the best. And he said, wow, he said, if only I could go to school. But he says now, when tourists get in the carriage and they ask Mr. Garcia a question, if he doesn't know it, then I tell the tourists the answer. And so the tourists, they pat me when they leave. They pat me and say, oh, Stargazer, we had a good time. Stargazer loved all the attention. Gretchen and people talking to him and patting him, he was just so happy. And Gretchen came one afternoon. Stargazer said, Gretchen, you know there are tourists that come from other countries, and I don't know their languages. I want to learn to speak all the languages I hear, Italian and Spanish and Russian, and can you get me books from the library? How can I learn this? And Gretchen says, oh, Stargazer, I will get language CDs out of the library and loan you my CD player, and I'll listen with you. And so every afternoon, Gretchen came, and she usually had an apple or a carrot, and Stargazer is very, very smart and a very, very good listener. He learned Chinese, he learned Italian, he learned Spanish, he learned Norwegian. Now, when these people came from other countries that did not speak English, he spoke to them in their language. And then he got even more interested in world history. And he said to Gretchen, bring me some books on Chinese history and Russian history. I don't know enough about their history to really talk at an advanced level. And Gretchen said, sure. So one day when it was time to go to work, it was overcast, it was gray, and it was a little bit drizzly. And Mr. Garcia said, well, we might not find any tourists. He said, but I have to work, and so do you. Mr. Garcia said, I have too many children to feed, and I have to feed you. He said, we'll have to go out in the rain. And so Stargazer walks out in the rain, and he can tell the difference that the gravel is a little bit slippery. And they found a newlywed couple from France that wanted to take a ride. Mr. Garcia said, come on in. Where do you want to go? And they said, we want to see Valley Forge. And Valley Forge was really pretty far away from Philadelphia. Stargazer had never been there before, but he thought, oh well, at least we're working. And so they started up a long, long hill to Valley Forge, and Stargazer could feel that because of the drizzle, it wasn't a heavy rain, but he was still getting wet. You know, his mane got wet, and then the water from the rain went in his eyes, and he didn't like it. He shook his head a lot, and he was going very slowly, so because he could feel the slipperiness. But all of a sudden he went, and he fell down on both of his knees really, really hard. Oh, it hurt so much. Both knees hurt. And he stood there and just crying and crying. And Mr. Garcia hit him with a whip and said, get up, Stargazer. Keep walking. And Stargazer didn't care about getting hit with a whip. His knees hurt. And he didn't want to go all the way up the hill to Valley Forge, and he was just crying and crying. He said, you're a ghost horse. And Nelson, the ghost horse, said, yes, I am. I am Nelson, the ghost horse. I was George Washington's favorite horse, and I spent the winter at Valley Forge with General Washington. I listened to everything General Washington said to the soldiers, and then I told all the horses that the soldiers rode about what they needed to do in battle, that they couldn't run away once the bullets were firing and the cannonballs were firing. And Stargazer said, cannonballs? Bullets? Why didn't you run away? I would have run away. Nelson, the ghost horse, said, run away? He said, I am here to teach you about courage. Courage means even though you are scared, you keep going. And even though you fell down and hurt your knees, you keep going. And with that, the ghost was gone. And Stargazer said, where did Nelson go? I kind of like him. And he got up and his knees hurt. but he slowly walked all the way up the hill to Valley Forge. The next day, his knees kind of hurt, but Mr. Garcia said, I have to work, you have to work. Said, the summer season is when we have the tourists and I can make the most money. He said, but after I finish working all day here, driving the carriage, he said, I gotta go to my second job, washing dishes in a restaurant, because I gotta send money to my mother and father who live in Venezuela. They don't have enough money for food. So he said, even if I have a cold or I'm sick, I still go to work, and so will you, Stargazer. So Stargazer understood, and even though his knees hurt, he still got to see tourists and speak languages and get patted, and Gretchen came to see him, and Gretchen was so nice. She put 2 Band-Aids on his knees and gave him some children's aspirin. She said, this is what my mother gives me if I fall and hurt my knee. And oh, he loved children's aspirin because it was sweet. He said, how many of those can I have? Gretchen said, I don't know, you're pretty big. Maybe I'll give you half the bottle. So he was so happy when he was chewing all the aspirin and he had Band-Aids on his knees. And he continued to work. And there were fewer and fewer tourists because summer was leaving and autumn was coming in. And the leaves turned red and gold, and then brown, and started falling. And pretty soon there were no tourists at all. And Mr. Garcia said, Stargazer, I don't have enough money to feed you oats. I can just give you hay. So he threw some hay. And Stargazer was still hungry. And Mr. Garcia said, I found a grocery store that will pay me to deliver groceries to maybe some elderly people in their house that don't want to come out and drive to a grocery store. So now, instead of going around historic Philadelphia, Stargazer, who's getting thinner and thinner and he feels hungry all the time, they go down this back streets of Philadelphia to these row houses, and there are a lot of potholes in the road. He's got to be careful he don't fall down again because his knees still hurt. And so one night, Mr. Garcia said, look what I have for you. A great big bushel of apples that are beginning to rot. They're too brown for my children, so I'll give them to you. And he dumped them into Stargazer's pail. And Stargazer just ate them up as fast as he could. He didn't even care that they were brown. Oh, and he felt better. His stomach felt a little full. But then he remembered his mother. And he remembered growing up. When he was a foal, that's a baby horse, he and his mother lived in a pasture where there were peach trees right next to the pasture. And the peaches fell on the ground, and he and his mother both ate peaches right off the ground. And he had other foals, other baby horses, to play with, and they all ate peaches, and he ran around. And now he's thinking, look what's happened to me. I just, I'm skinny, my knees hurt. I don't know when the tourists come back. I'm told that winter comes in next, that it'll be very, very cold, except for Gretchen to talk to. And he fell asleep that night and had very, very bad dreams about what could happen to him. He was afraid he might actually starve and not work. He was pretty worried, actually. So the next morning, he always woke up when the sun rose, and the sun comes up in the morning. Oh, it's red, and it's gold, and it's big, and it was the same color of his mother. And so he already was feeling kind of hungry. And he sighed and kind of looked down, and he was just worried. And all of a sudden he looks up, and there is Nelson, the ghost horse. And Nelson said, "Stargazer, you seem sad. What's wrong, Stargazer?" Stargazer said, "Well, look at me. I'm just delivering groceries, and I feel very bad for my mother, because my mother said to me, she said, 'Stargazer, you have descended from a very long line of distinguished military horses, and you will bring pride to our family, and more pride. I can tell when I watch how you talk to me and to the other foals. You're just distinguished.'" Nelson the ghost horse said, "What military horses were in your family line?" And Stargazer said, "Well, do you know General Marion, the general in the South, in South Carolina? His horse Ball is my great-great-grandfather." Nelson says, "Ball was your great-great-grandfather?" He said, "I salute you." He said, "This means that somehow, and I can't tell the future, your life will change for you. Your mother is right. You do speak in a distinguished way. And I don't know, but just remember that spring will come after winter, and you'll always have some hay to eat, and you'll always have Gretchen. And if things look bad for you," he said, "I'll show up to be your friend." And with that, Nelson disappears. And Stargazer, he felt a little bit better and said, "Well, at least I have Nelson the ghost horse, and I have Gretchen, and this thing called winter." I'm from North Carolina, so I didn't get a lot of snow and ice when I was a foal, but I guess I'll find out about it. So one afternoon, Gretchen came skipping in and saying, "Guess what's happening in Philadelphia? Guess what's happening?" And Stargazer said, "What's happening in Philadelphia?" Gretchen said, "There's going to be an international conference for world peace. The President of the United States will be the host, and 180 leaders from 180 nations from all around the world will come here to talk and cooperate with one another so that we can have world peace." And Stargazer said, "Well," he said, "I don't understand. What will we need for world peace?" And Gretchen said, "Well, what my mother told me is that if all the adults had a job and they made enough money so they could have a nice place to live, doesn't have to be big, but a nice little place to live, and food for themselves and their children, and if they get sick, enough medicine to go to the doctor." And Stargazer understood immediately. If that's what world peace meant, he wanted to learn more about it. He certainly didn't get enough to eat, and he'd never been to the veterinarian for his knees, which still kind of ached when he got up in the morning. And Gretchen came every day and brought her radio, and they would listen to world leaders talking, and the president was going to arrive the very next day. But what roared in that night, it roared in, was a blizzard, and snow came pounding down on the city of Philadelphia. And when Stargazer woke up, he'd never seen 3 feet of snow on the ground before, and he was cold, and Mr. Garcia brought in a sleigh for him to pull. A sleigh is like a carriage, people sit in it, and but it's like a sled. It doesn't have wheels, and it just slides across ice and snow. And Stargazer was hitched up to it, and you know, he hadn't had much breakfast, but he said, okay, maybe we'll see some tourists and we can get some more money. So he very slowly walks down the road. The road is quite icy. And so Mr. Garcia says, we're going to stay across the street from where the President of the United States is staying. And lots of people will be there, and I bet the taxis can't ride on the ice, so we'll get some business today, Stargazer. So Stargazer felt happier. And they were across the street from this huge, huge hotel, and people were lined up on the sidewalks, cheering and cheering and cheering, waiting for the president to come out. All of a sudden, the doors of the hotel open, and who comes out first? 6 men who were part of the Secret Service. The Secret Servicemen, they guard the President of the United States whenever he goes anywhere. And a minute later, who walks out? He's very tall, the President of the United States. And he waves to everyone. But then he takes a step and he slips, falls, and hits his head on the ice, and he's unconscious. Unconscious means that you don't get up. As a matter of fact, it looks like the person's asleep, but they're not. And he hit his head so hard, it meant he was very badly hurt. And the Secret Service were going down to each car and saying, bring your car over here. We've got to get Mr. President to Jefferson Hospital. Well, the cars tried, and their wheels went roo, 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 and they couldn't move. None of the cars could move, and they tried harder. Roo, 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 roo. Those are the wheels going run, 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 and black smoke is coming out of the tailpipes. And one of the Secret Servicemen spots Stargazer and says, bring your horse over here right now. And so Stargazer walks very cautiously on the ice, and the sleigh is very light and goes right. And so Dr. Kennedy, who is the personal physician of the President of the United States, he said, we must carefully lift the President onto the sleigh and cover him with blankets. And they did that. And then all the Secret Servicemen and Mr. Garcia, they all jumped on the sleigh. And Mr. Garcia hit Stargazer, and Stargazer said, well, it's icy. And he was going very, very slowly, trying not to fall down. And so one of the Secret Servicemen said, the sleigh's too heavy. Okay, everybody except Ted, who's the head of the Secret Service, you stay on. The rest of us will walk by the sleigh. Dr. Kennedy, you'll have to walk. Mr. Garcia, you'll have to walk. So Ted picked up the reins and took the whip and hit Stargazer a couple of times. And Stargazer thought, well, as soon as he get to the hospital, and he tried to just do like a fast walk, a fast walk, a fast walk. And he was looking down, you know, because the ice covers the potholes. Did you know that? So you can't even see them. So he's walking and walking faster, and all of a sudden, the ice breaks over a very large pothole, and Stargazer goes down on both knees and on his shoulder. And he's in so much pain, and he's crying, and he can't get up. He wants very badly to get up. Well, now, boys and girls, I need to ask you something. What do you think will happen? Will Stargazer get up and pull the president to Jefferson Hospital? Will the president be able to speak tomorrow to 180 different leaders from around the world? What's going to happen next? And I'm going to tell you something. There is a very big surprise at the end of my children's book, Stargazer, the Horse Who Loved History. So I'll show it to you again. It's on Amazon. It costs $6. Ask your mommy or your daddy to get a copy for you. And I'll be back with another story about Stargazer. Bye-bye.
Everybody, bye-bye.